Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am delighted to, I'm Debra Werner, and I write about space policy and business for SpaceNews. And I'm delighted to introduce this panel of people who have worked and are working in manufacturing in space. This is something we've been discussing for decades, but it's only now that the commercial and government investment in infrastructure is coming together to go from the research that's been done to real business cases. And so we'll hear about some of those today. That progress is thanks in no small part to the people here on stage. So I'll introduce them, and you can read more of their bios on the app or online because we just have time for a brief introduction. Sven Eenmaa, on the end, is the Director of Investment and Economic Analysis at the ISS National Lab, the US government-funded laboratory in low Earth orbit. Prior to that, he was a senior equity analyst focused on industrial and clean technologies. Next to him is Jonathan Baliff, CFO of Redwire, a company established in 2020 to supply mission-critical solutions and high reliability components for next generation space systems and infrastructure. We were just talking about this, and even though Redwire was formed in 2020, the companies that make up Redwire have decades of space experience. Jonathan has an extensive background in the aerospace, energy, and infrastructure sectors, where he served in leadership roles for decades. Dr. Douglas Terrier, Associate Director for Vision and Strategy at NASA's Johnson Space Center, was the former NASA Chief Technologist. Jaret Matthews, founder and CEO of Astrolab, a company focused on designing, building, and operating a fleet of multi-purpose commercial planetary rovers, including the SUV-sized Flex rover that you might have seen in front of the building. And Jaret worked on Mars rovers at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and he also worked at SpaceX on the Dragon capsule. And last but not least is Andrew Parlock, Managing Director of SpaceForge US, the US arm of the UK startup seeking to lead the clean industrial revolution by harnessing space. Before SpaceForge, Andrew focused on the Defense Department business for ICEYE, a Finnish company that operates a constellation of radar satellites. So Sven, I'll ask you to set the stage. What's the benefit of manufacturing something in low Earth orbit rather than on the ground?
So yeah, hi everybody, and great to see everybody here. Thanks for inviting me to the conference. So a very fundamental level, right? So if you think about microgravity, weightlessness changes some of the kind of observable phenomena when it comes to life sciences, comes to physical sciences. You know, stem cells grow differently, you know, in the space. You can get different type of 3D cell structures, which can be valuable in drug development, regenerative medicine, organ growth. Crystallization processes happen differently in the space, right? You can get high quality crystals, which are good for also life sciences, advanced materials, potential semi-industries, semiconductor industries. So the goal here really is to use the microgravity environment to either disrupt current terrestrial markets where the solutions are of lower quality, or actually create new solutions, right? What can, you know, address consumer needs or industrial needs. Where does the industry stand currently? You know, it's in broadly where we are is in kind of, you know, in proof of concept cycles in, you know, TRL 5, 6 levels. But there is a lot of interest from academia, a lot of business interest, and you know, that's where we currently are.
So Jonathan, Redwire was in the news recently for bioprinting a meniscus on the International Space Station in your biofabrication facility, which is about the size of a microwave oven. Is bioprinting...
A big microwave oven.
Big microwave oven?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's not fitting on the table, but yeah.
Okay. Is bioprinting a promising field for in-space manufacturing? And where else do you see promise?
Well, I mean, what Sven said, right? We're in demonstration phase specifically for the products that are coming out of the bioprinters and the crystallization laboratories on the ISS. We currently have 10 experiments going on at the ISS. We printed a meniscus and sent it back to Earth. So I would say the TRL of the actual products are 5, but actually the bioprinter is not. I mean, it's printing right now. And then we've also printed crystals in space. We have what we call the pill box, which is the pharmaceutical in a box to create crystals. On CRS-29, which is going to go up at the beginning of November, we're actually sending up the pill box to do crystallization for Eli Lilly. So, you know, when you do these crystals, like Sven said, you get very perfect prints, right? And although you say, well, then what do? You send it back to Earth, and are we going to start manufacturing? And the answer is yes, but you can actually get the model of the crystal, and then Eli Lilly and frankly Merck used it already with Keytruda. Keytruda was the crystals that then allow Keytruda, which is a cancer medication, to be able to have effectiveness. That modeling gets down to Earth. Now, as far as the meniscus is concerned, I'm not saying I'm not going to go run with my new meniscus printed in space tomorrow, but again, the modeling gets done. And in that environment, you're basically replicating your mother's womb, right? You're replicating an environment that the original printing happens, biologically. And this gets to the key piece of space. It is the key to personalized medicine. We believe at Redwire that the key to personalized medicine, so you don't have rejection drugs, is to print these in space, or at least some amount of them in space, and then get the data down to Earth so that it can be printed for people tomorrow. I mean, this is technology that has real promise in the 2020s and 2030s.
Douglas, what is NASA doing to pave the way for this in-space economy, including manufacturing?
Yeah, thank you. And that's a great question. I think for everybody's benefit, obviously NASA's focused on exploration and particularly extending human presence out in the solar system. But we do that in a very strategic way that accomplishes that goal, sort of the science and exploration goal, but does that in a way where we architect the system to, as much as possible, maximize the opportunity for taking advantage of commercialization and commercial entrepreneurship and innovation, but also to kind of leave in our wake a framework that that fosters commercial growth. Both those goals are fundamental roles of the government, and sometimes the second one, the part about creating that economic opportunity, is not discussed inside or outside NASA as much as it should. I think we're doing a much better job of that today. As you can see, we've moved to a commercial model for low Earth orbit transport. We're now moving to commercialize LEO itself with space stations, manufacturing capabilities, et cetera. And we intend, as we move with the Artemis program out to the moon and out into the solar system, to have that model progress with us and continue to. And there are obvious. There are programs that are very specific, like OSAM 1 and 2, which are about in-space manufacturing and assembly. And then there's just the architecture of how we're using commercial providers for landers on the moon, eventually for in-situ research development on the moon, that will essentially both foster and provide opportunity for economic opportunity.
Great. So now I'd like to turn to Andrew and Jaret, two of the people helping to establish that infrastructure and the transportation that will be needed. Space transportation has come a long way. The cost of sending satellites to low Earth orbit is about 1/10 of what it was a decade ago, and launches seem to be happening daily or multiple times a day. Still, there's not much transportation back to Earth. Andrew, why is return transportation important for in-space manufacturing?
Yeah, great. It becomes interesting. We talk a lot about product development, and there's a lot of folks here. I was in a roundtable this morning about product development, which is keenly important. But then there's the market development. Do people know that we're creating better and better materials that bring benefit to today, which I think is really important from a very tactical. But then the whole concept of infrastructure development. If we don't get these great products back to these great markets that we've created, where are we? We've done a lot of really great science experiments, and we've spent a lot of money in orbit. So what Space Forge has done is we've created a really novel return technology that allows us to enable that infrastructure. We talk about some of the cost and closing the business cases of how we return, how we go up, how we manufacture, and how we return. If we don't close this business case, that's another piece of the puzzle, right? We have to, the infrastructure doesn't have to just exist, but it has to be cost effective so that we're delivering on the promise of everything that we talked about. So for us, it's really about the triad: market development, product development, and then together with a lot of partners, infrastructure development that allows us to go up and come back in a way that closes the business case. And the thing I said this morning, closes the business case tactically. We need to start closing business cases today. It's, you know, the promise of in-space manufacturing in 2030, 2035, it's too late. We need to get these business cases closed sooner, and that's the path that Space Forge is taking now.
Got it, great. And so, Jaret, manufacturing will not take place just in low Earth orbit. There was a debate for years about whether it was in space manufacturing or on orbit. And we understand now it's not just in orbit. It will happen on surfaces, including the Moon and Mars, which you're preparing for. So, because your Flex rover is going to the lunar surface in 2026, what can you tell us about plans underway for using the resources on the Moon for manufacturing?
Great, yeah, thank you everyone for coming. This is an exciting topic to discuss. So yeah, at Astrolab we're creating the underlying infrastructure that we think is going to be the catalyst for the lunar economy. So mobility, power, and communications. And as you mentioned, we have a mission to the Moon on Starship in 2026. And we're able to bring with us on that mission up to 1.5 tons of customer cargo. And we're now selling that cargo capacity to downstream customers, and then that gives us a unique vantage point of all the various ways that people are intending to use the Moon. And there's quite a few of our customers who are concentrated on using lunar resources to produce value. And there's a variety of ways they're looking at that. So you have folks actually taking the bulk regolith and extracting oxygen for refueling rockets. Or you have folks taking out the titanium and aluminum that's in the bulk regolith on the Moon. You have folks looking at export of helium-3 from the Moon back to Earth, which is a useful fuel for fusion here on Earth. You even have folks looking at doing agriculture on the Moon as well. So what I think is interesting is really no one is really inventing new ways to make money. They're just doing things that you do here on Earth to make money and just doing it on the Moon. So the Moon is the size of the combined area of about North and South America. And if you imagine a new continent popped up in the middle of the Pacific Ocean overnight, there'd be a mad scramble to take advantage of that new land and try to derive value from it. And we're essentially sitting at that stage in history now where the transportation network is being built out to get us from the Earth to the Moon at scale and economically. And that's really going to enable, an industrial revolution on the Moon.
So one of the questions this panel was asked to address was the prospects for moving heavy and polluting industry to space, which is an interesting question, but not a simple one. So let's begin by talking about how space-based manufacturing is likely to progress. Andrew, Space Forge has some plans for in-space manufacturing. Will you need large and more sophisticated facilities as you progress from materials to semiconductor components to perhaps someday a fab?
Yeah, when we say semiconductors, everyone says a fab in space. That's a little ways away. Let's all be honest with ourselves here. That's 15, 20 years away to see fabs in space. I think what's really important, it's been alluded to up here on the panel a few times, is we need to take steps to get to a carbon negative a world, right? We didn't get where we are with the environmental issues we have today overnight. We're not going to solve the problem overnight. So for us in Space Forge, it's really about what can we do very tactically today to create products for us that's semiconductor substrates that we can bring back to Earth, get into the supply chain that reduce energy consumption of existing chips by 60, 80%. That's a really big deal, and that's a very small step, but a very tactical step to getting polluting industries off surface into the low Earth economy. But I do think it is important that we start thinking about, again, not to harp on this concept of infrastructure, right? If we're going to get to the promise of in-space manufacturing and moving these heavy industries off, we have to start tactically with small steps that are real, that the public understands, that the market develops around, that we get a groundswell of public support for, and then, as everyone talked about here, the infrastructure to build that. And then slowly but surely, little pie piece by little pie piece, we can begin moving those really polluting industries off surface. The final piece is power, right? There's a big concern about power on orbit. Well, last I checked, there's something up there in space that powers this entire planet. We just need to be able to extract the correct amount of energy from solar. There's probably some steps in there with nuclear power before we get to maybe a sea change in space-based solar power. So there's a few micro steps to get us there, but I think we're moving in the right direction.
So, yeah, I think that this whole idea of moving the heavy and polluting industry, it's talking about just what you're saying. How do we help solve the problems on Earth through space? You don't simply move industry to space. Everything's different. The laws of physics seem different. Maybe not the laws of physics, but, cooling. There's a lot of cooling available. There's a lot of sunlight available. So Douglas, how do you see this progressing?
So I actually think that's a great way to look at it, right? It turns out, why are these industries polluting and requires, a lot of it's about energy and how inefficient a lot of our processes are. It turns out space is a remarkable, the most demanding environment that forces one, necessity is mother invention, forces you to come up with sustainable ways of dealing with water and consumables, forces you to come up with more efficient power sources because of the scarcity of things in space. So without even intending to, the very fact that you try to do things in space forces you to develop ways to do them more efficiently, which have immediate impact and reducing the footprint on Earth. And then a lot of the things we do in space are about a sustainable model, whether it's inside the International Space Station, where we've managed now for 23 years to develop easily the most, if you want a model of sustainability, that probably would be a great one. And many of those lessons are very directly transferable to our processes for water purification, for for how to live with more austere and responsible way to live with the materials that we have on Earth. So I think there's a lot there just in the fact that we're exploring space that immediately impacts what we're doing on Earth. And when you think about in-space manufacturing, I kind of think of it in a couple different ways. One of them is obviously the things that we've talked about a little, whether it's tissue growth or crystalline structures ranging from materials to chips, pharmaceuticals. There are a lot of applications that just are done better in space that can offload what's going on the planet. The second piece is manufacturing the consumables that we need in space from the surface, not having to extract them and with the associated environmental impact on Earth. And then the third is actually building the machines that we explore with in space, for materials in space. And all of those things, again, will drive efficiencies and will take that burden off of the Earth-borne industries. So I think there's a lot there directly, and as we develop more efficient techniques in space, we'll see more of the industries transfer to be space-based.
So Sven, would significant infrastructure be needed to move heavy industry to space?
I mean, yes, that's the short answer. I think there is going to be progression to things, right? If you think about the whole kind of the curvature of the development of in-space manufacturing, initially, the initial steps will be probably, small batch-produced products with high value per dollar value per kilogram, right? And that will provide some base in terms of actual business cases which will close and increasing investor confidence to invest in infrastructure in space. And as the critical mass increases, the industries will be able to move more down to more commoditized areas where they can have a bigger impact, and that will bring with it also, higher sustainability levels.
So Jaret, As a former SpaceXer, you have some insight into one of the big things that is coming, which is Starship, which many people alluded to during various conversations today. So how could that affect this transition to in-space manufacturing?
Yeah, I think we'll ultimately look back on this period, the way we think about the iPhone in the pre-iPhone world and then post-iPhone world. That's how we'll ultimately view Starship, because it really does change the calculus in terms of how you approach space engineering. The entire history of spaceflight has been all about exclusive focus on mass efficiency because of the launch problem, and that drives cost up. Also, because of launch and frequency, you have to have extreme reliability. And that drives costs up. So you end up with these once a decade, multi-billion-dollar missions. What I think Starship allows for is you can instead apply more mass to make more robust systems. You can have more of those systems to get inherent resiliency in what you're doing rather than specifically, making a hyper-reliable system. And it's really going to unlock this era. And make things like putting significant amounts of infrastructure on the lunar surface possible. Well, one thing, no matter how much infrastructure you have in space, you need the bulk material. You need the inputs to your process, right? And Starship either makes that easier from Earth, or I think more interesting is actually getting to a point where we can launch significant amounts of material off the moon. Because fundamentally, it's 20 times easier from an energy perspective to get a kilo off the moon than it is off of Earth. And launch is fundamentally a polluting enterprise, at least in its current form. And so shifting that to the moon and providing the source material for all this this future of in-space manufacturing, I think is going to be a significant change.
You were nodding, Douglas. What do you think? Does that sound interesting to you?
It does sound interesting, and I can't help but to think about we actually have a pretty good kind of existence proof for how this is going to progress, because we've seen what happened when people left the old world, moved to the new world, what was a pretty barren, open frontier, whatever. And initially, a lot of what we're talking about, a lot of the industry and manufacturing and developing the whether consumables or supplies to fund those missions came from the old world. But you gradually start to see that move off-world in a more efficient, I don't think many Europeans would have predicted that North America would innovate and outproduce them economically, and I think that's what we're going to see. We're going to see that the resources on the surface of the moon and the planets and asteroids is going to become the center of production to become a net producer, and maybe actually be an exporter to Earth in the long term. And so initially, not unlike that model that I just described, you will be primarily focused in space on producing the consumables and the materials and the capabilities you need and the machines you need in space to service that. But you will actually see that will become a net producer, and that's how you actually offload the all the heavy industries on Earth and so on. Is that they move off as we develop that frontier.
Did anybody else want to chime in?
The only thing I think from a Redwire perspective is concerning, heavy manufacturing that could move to the moon, or, I really get to the, point that Doug was making is we'll learn a lot that can be applied to the Earth to be able to get these polluting industries less pollutive. More than in our lifetime, more of those industries going to space. For sure, we want space to do no harm, right? That's the idea. But to think that you're going to see mass manufacturing, anytime soon. But I think what you will see is technology transfer to the Earth to be able to be more efficient. Remember, the most polluting industries are primarily energy, agriculture, and transportation is a lot less than people think. And I just don't, from a space-based standpoint, Redwire is also doing agricultural experiments on the ISS, as you know, and there is a tremendous amount of technology. You don't have to build it in space and send it to Earth. You can build it in space and learn how to do it on Earth, and that's the way you get the less polluted environment.
It will be hard to make an argument currently in terms of given how capital intensive space is, that you can move the commodity industries at this stage at least. It is I understand the manufacturing in space for space sake or space exploration focused, but in terms of trying to compete with the rest of the cost will be a challenge. And that means it's hard to attract private capital. I think we've seen in earlier years, we've seen that in the clean tech industry, for example. There was the initial discussions of, it's clean tech, therefore you should pay a premium for it. The markets didn't really pay a premium for it.
Not until it became competitive from a cost standpoint. We believe the same thing. The whole idea of Redwire is to create infrastructure and products that are not only cost competitive, but actually are better. A crystal made in space, it's been proven, is better. It's more perfect, and the information can get down to Earth so that you can create it. And I think that's what we're going to see. Eventually, we're going to see what we're talking about, which is manufacturing offloaded.
Yeah, there's a really good point that's just being talked about, and it's amazing. You've got to get, I love what Redwire's doing, you've got to get tactical. You've got to get, what can we do today here on Earth? So we're going to get the advantage of these products in space. We're going to bring it back down, and we're going to remove carbon from our current processes, right? And then as we remove carbon from those current processes, and we get closer and closer to this dream of carbon neutral or even carbon negative, the dream of these products, and then all that we learn in space starts to move. So it's definitely a stepwise process, but I would challenge all of my colleagues here in the room and focused on in-space manufacturing to really start thinking about those very tactical things we can do today, and I think that's critically important, right? It's critically important for raising capital. If you're not tactical, you're not bringing back value, you're not raising capital. If you don't have customers, you just have experiments, you're not raising capital, right? And you're also not solving the problems that we're claiming that we can solve. So let's get really focused on the here and now and solve those problems.
And you're doing that with materials.
That's our focus right now. As we know, there's a set of advanced materials specifically around semiconductor substrates that we can bring back to Earth. These are relatively lightweight things, low mass, high value. All of my colleagues have said it here, that can drive 60, 70, 80% efficiency gains in today's production here on Earth. That gets us closer and closer to this carbon negative and pulling more and more carbon out of today's processes. That's critical.
I think that what Doug said, you can take this metaphor all the way, the new world. What did sometimes you can go a little bit too far. It was Indigenous Week, but they came for gold, right? Gold was transportable. It was the commodity that had the highest value in, the 15th and 14th century, and that's what allowed it to happen. And the gold today is information and pharmaceuticals right now as we see it at Redwire. It doesn't mean that we're not doing 3D printing, tools on the ISS, which we are, or we're not going to do. We're going to do sintering of a landing pad for obviously Jaret's, landers. We're going to do that, but today the best way to get manufacturing and industry and cost is in these very high value products in space. It's the gold of today.
And is the gold on the moon the water?
Depends on who you ask. Yeah. There's a lot of interest in helium-3. Helium-3 has a market price of $20 million a kilo on Earth. That's pretty good. That's a lot better than gold. And there's millions of tons of it on the moon. So I think that one's pretty interesting. And it's also will be interesting to see what role the moon might play in actually reversing climate change. There's an interesting company here in LA called Ethos that's part of their plan is to actually build a sunshade and
we were talking about that.
And reflect some of the sunlight's energy, and essentially drop the Earth's temperature by a few degrees, which is a completely reversible process, unlike dumping a bunch of sulfur in the atmosphere or whatever. And if you think about climate change, a problem the scale of climate change, we're going to spend trillions of dollars trying to solve that over the next decade, and so it's not inconceivable that some of that money could go to the moon as part of the solution.
And that actually brings up another somewhere in between building products of which there are a few today and will continue to be more that are more efficiently built in space, and then our building products for space consumption in situ. And then there's the, I'm a port of resupply for missions going further into space. And that economy is one that cannot be underestimated long term, right? Because there's no question that I actually don't have to do that more cheaply or more affordably or with less energy than on Earth, because getting it out of Earth's gravity is a no-brainer. That's not a very good comparison. I can do things in space a lot if I'm going to use them in space or further into space. It's much more economical to do it there, including things like if I need a large amount of material to build a solar collector or a reflector or so on. Carrying that kind of material out of Earth's gravity is a ridiculous proposition, right? And anything of a certain size, we probably exceeded the size with the James Webb Telescope that we can origami inside a fairing. We will be building things in space going forward. Where will those materials come from? Well, they can come up separately, or they can come from sources in space.
Yeah, great. Okay, our time is up. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you.